Hello! Today we are going to be going through every single book that I own that I have not read. You know, it's actually not that many. Less than 20 books that I own that I have never read. And I don't actually know how many I own, but it's a few hundred, so I feel like that ratio is pretty good. I'm decent about not buying books that I think that I won't read, and if I haven't read a book that I own after a number of years, I tend to either donate or sell it. So I feel like overall, I'm doing okay. And you will perhaps notice a little bit of a trend once we get started. And we will start right off with the first book that will follow this trend, and that is The Honey Witch. This was the May Fairyloot, so obviously I've only had it for a couple weeks. I've not had a chance to read it. This is a cozy fantasy, sapphic fantasy, cozy, whatever, so I'm very excited for this. Even though I'm not a huge cozy fantasy person, it still sounds like something that I will definitely enjoy, so I will be reading this, and it is beautiful and has bees on the spine, which you can't go wrong with. Next, we have the entire Red Rising series. Well, not the entire series. I own Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. I didn't pull book 2 and 3 down because I was lazy, but this is also the Fairyloot Iron editions. I am going to get the first book from the library and read it, and if I don't like it, I will probably sell this whole series since they are pretty valuable, and you know, you gotta do what you gotta do to survive in this economy. That's just but this seems like something I would like. I've seen people say that if you like The Will of the Many by James Islington, you will like this series and vice versa, and I absolutely loved that book, so I am hopeful for Red Rising, but it is something that I've kind of put off reading for a long time, so we shall see. Next, we have a very battered copy of Circe by Madeline Miller. I got this in a little free library a couple years ago. I loved The Song of Achilles, and so I think I just picked this up right after, but I just have not had any desire to read it. I'm not sure if it has much like romance in it. I don't think it does. And so I think I would have to be in a specific mood to enjoy this. So after like another year or two, if I don't read it, I'll probably just get rid of it. Next, we have The Wolf of Oren-Yaro, which is a fantasy inspired by, I think, like Indonesian mythology. I pretty much bought this at Barnes & Noble because it was part of the buy one, get one 50% off sale, and I think there were a couple other books that I wanted, and so I just needed another book to buy to be able to get the 50% off on like the third book I was buying probably. So I had just seen this for a couple years, and it seems like something that I would probably enjoy. It's just that it's long and dense, and not that I don't read a lot of long and dense books, but I don't know. It just has never quite captured my attention enough to read, but I definitely will try to get to this at some point soon. We also have a lot of Book of the Month books, because when I tried to cancel my Book of the Month subscription, I ended up with like 13 unused credits because it didn't actually cancel when it said it canceled, and I was paying for it for over a year without knowing. So then I had a bunch of credits that I had to go in and like order books off the Book of the Month backlog just so that my credits didn't go to waste. So this book, Bringing Down the Duke, is one such book from that event, and I will definitely read this. This is like a historical fiction romance, and I do love Bridgerton, but you know, the men are a little not my style, so I'm thinking that maybe this will be a little bit less grumpy men, angry, abusive kind of vibes, so I will definitely read this. Another book of the month from that same event, we have The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I don't read nonfiction like at all, so I don't really know why I bought this. I've skimmed it, and I feel like it's something I could read really fast. It's less than 300 pages. It seems decently interesting. He's funny enough. I think I should just take a day and just read this so that I can probably just get rid of it. Then we have another Fairyloot book from 2024, which was The City of Stardust. This was a fantasy romance, I think like a portal fantasy romance. The main character ends up going from one world to the other, and I read the description and it was just not something that was very interesting to me. I'm just keeping all of my Fairyloot books for 2024 for the moment so that at the end of the year I can do another Is Fairyloot Worth It 2024 reviewed, because my video on Fairyloot from last year did very well and I would like to repeat that, so I'm just keeping them all, but I really don't think I'll ever read this unless I just have nothing else. Then we have the second book in a series, which is Find Me Their Bones by Sarah Wolf. I read the first book probably 5 years ago when it came out, and I loved it. So then I think I don't remember why I bought this because I never really intended on reading the second one after so many years had passed and I had no idea what had happened in the first book anymore. Like, I remember almost nothing except for that I loved the romance subplot and that I actually really liked the main character, and it was kind of a cool twist on like vampire and witch lore, but I didn't remember enough to actually pick this up, and so I would have to reread the first book in order to continue the series, and I'm not sure if I really am interested in doing that. So this might not actually stick around for that much longer. We have a Fairyloot book from last year. This is Shanghai Immortal. I think that this will go away pretty soon. I definitely would have sold it if it had been worth anything, but it's not really worth anything, and it's one of the bad Fairyloot Hotterscape printings, which means the sprayed edges are pretty bad and overall the quality is just not very good, but it just didn't really seem like a book that I would be interested in. I could read the description and like the first few pages, and I just knew it'd probably end up being a 3-star read. It would be fine, but not necessarily worth my time, so this will also probably go away at some point. Then we have The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, and this is the Fairyloot book from last year. It is gorgeous. I think I will keep it forever, probably just because it's the prettiest book that I own, and one of the prettiest books that Fairyloot has ever done. I just don't want to slog through this. It is almost 500 pages and it just did not sound quite interesting enough to me for 500 pages. I think I read the first 15 pages and just kind of was like, okay, yes, I could get through this, but at what cost? I just could tell immediately that it would not be interesting enough to be worth my time. But I just could be completely wrong on that. And we have another Fairyloot book, it's sensing the theme now, and that is The Hurricane Wars, which is also one of the most beautiful books Fairyloot has ever done. I was really excited for this when I read the description, and then the reviews started coming out, and it just sounded kind of like another typical fantasy romance. I love fantasy. I love romance. I love fantasy with romance subplots, but the genre of fantasy romance is just so beaten to death and so repetitive. All the books are like exactly the same characters, just in different fonts. All the worlds are pretty much exactly the same, just slight variations in the magic system and the plot, but they all kind of meander to the same place, which is that the plot's not that interesting and the romance is just kind of subpar, and that is what I heard about this. But perhaps I will give it a shot at some point. We will see. But I am keeping this because it's beautiful. Then we have another Fairyloot book, but this one is from April, and that is Evocation by S.T. Gibson. I do plan on reading this. Pretty much like a magical kind of alchemical version of Boston. And I don't read much magical realism, but I seem to kind of enjoy it when I do. It's just a nice change of pace from having to actually learn a new world completely in fantasy, so I will probably pick this up. Then we have Skyward Flight by Brandon Sanderson. I've read the whole Skyward series. This is the collection of novellas. I read the first one. You can see where my bookmark is right there. So technically I've read it, but I've only read the first novella, and I just kind of didn't care enough to read the rest of them, and I'm not sure that I ever will. Then we have Lessons in Chemistry, another book of the month book from that unfortunate credit occurrence. I didn't really plan on reading this once I read the description because I thought it was a little bit different than it actually was. I didn't realize that it took place on like a cooking show and not actually a science kind of chemistry thing like I was expecting. But then I did watch the first 2 episodes of the show of this on the plane on the way to Mexico because they had the first 2, and I don't have Apple TV, and so of course I watched the first 2 episodes and they were really good, and then I have not been able to actually finish the show because I don't have Apple TV. But that kind of inspired me to maybe read the book, so this might be one of my beach reads this summer. Then we have House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This is the 3rd and final book in the Crescent City series. I used to be a massive Sarah J. Maas fan, and by used to, I mean like 2013, 2012, way back. Not at all in her recent popularity, and pretty much every year I fall further and further and further off the Sarah J. Maas bandwagon. I would not consider myself to be a hater, but nor am I a lover. I was just kind of neutral on Crescent City. I thought the first one was pretty decent. The second book was horrible and desperately needed an editor. Like, all of her recent releases, someone needs to go in there and just slash and burn and slash. Like, it truly feels like she just sends her final manuscript to Bloomsbury and they're like, cool, slap a sticker on it, get her on the shelf. Like, it really just feels like there's absolutely no developmental editing going on at all, because the second Crescent City book had absolutely zero plot until like the last 20 pages, and so I just have had absolutely no desire to read almost 800, no more than 800 pages of this book. But you know, if I'm in the right mood, I think that I could maybe like in the fall, we'll see. Then we have Mother of Death and Dawn by Carissa Broadbent. This is the third book in the War of Lost Hearts series. I read book 1 and I really liked it. I read book 2 and it was, I liked it, but then I saw again how long book 3 was. Almost 700 pages, and I just kind of decided I didn't care enough about what happened to trudge through the third book. I thought the first book started this series with a lot of potential, but then the main character just started to get a little bit annoying. I'm not a huge fan of the like, oh no, my entire people have been wiped out, now I must go free everyone and get revenge as the solo person who happened to not be enslaved by the evil empire kind of train of plot. I don't necessarily know why, it just feels a little overused to me, and so once it shifted from like training, which if you watch my videos you will know that I am a hoe for any sort of academy or training based book. So once the first book shifted away from that, I kind of lost interest a little bit. I did like the romance though. And the final book that I own that I have never read is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare, which is also a Fairyloot book from I think last October. And this is one of the ugliest books that Fairyloot has ever done. The sprayed edges are very nice, but these boring characters on the cover, it's like the most uninspired illustration. No hate to the illustrator, but just the actual design of it is so uninspired, and therefore an author who is very popular, this book is not reselling for anything, or else I would have gotten rid of it already, because I've never been a Cassandra Clare fan, I've never been a Mortal Instruments fan, but when I saw that she was coming out with an adult fantasy book, I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll give her another chance. And then I read some of the reviews, and since they were not overwhelmingly positive or even moderately positive, I just decided, you know what? Again, is it worth my time to trudge through 600 pages for maybe a 3-star read? I mean, who knows? It could surprise me. It's not like I agree with the general consensus of every book, but I feel like when something is rated an average of lower than 4 stars, it's almost guaranteed that I will not consider it a 5-star read, especially for new releases. So, it was just, you know, it would be gone already if it had good resale value, but it doesn't, so it's just been sticking around. And that is it. That is every book that I own that I've never read. You can see all of the books behind me. I have these 2 shelves that are full. Then I have some books in this furniture piece over here, and a couple over there, and then a couple in my book cart, and that's pretty much it. If I had more room, I would probably certainly have more books that I've never read, but you know, we're a little bit limited in space and scope, so I try to get rid of books as much as possible to make room for new ones. And so let me know if there are any of these that you highly recommend that I take a stab at, and see you next time. Bye.